You have walked into rooms and felt it before a single word was spoken. Not quite a thought, not quite a memory, something more subtle, a shift in the air, a tension beneath the smiles, a conviction that was already there before you had the slightest evidence. And you learned early not to say it out loud, because when you did, people looked at you like you were the problem, paranoid, too sensitive, too deep for ordinary conversation. So you stayed quiet. You learned to doubt the signal even as it was screaming. You called it anxiety. You called it overthinking. You spent years convincing yourself you were wrong when almost every time you were right. Carl Jung considered what most people call intuition to be nothing like magic. It is perception operating subtly beneath the threshold of conscious awareness. The human mind, he argued, processes infinitely more than it allows to surface. And in certain people, that processing does not stay buried. It rises, it speaks, it insists. Jung called this the language of the unconscious, and he believed that the people who hear it most clearly do not possess a special gift. They are paying a price that most people will never have to pay. Today, I want to show you what that price is and what it builds in the people who learn to carry it without breaking. 1. You were never reading minds. You were reading everything else. Most people move through social interaction at surface level. They hear the words, they accept the tone, they take the gesture at face value and move on. You never could, not because you were suspicious, not because you were broken, but because something in your perceptual architecture refused to stop at the surface. You registered the micro-expression that contradicted the smile, the pause that lasted a half second too long before the answer came, the way someone's body angled slightly away while their words leaned forward. Jung described certain individuals as having a heightened sensitivity. He named it the shadow of others, not their darkness, but the part of themselves they were concealing, the gap between the presented self and the real self. You felt that gap without being able to name it, and it cost you something. Because you sat across from people who seemed perfectly reasonable to everyone else and felt something no one else seemed to feel. Unease, warning, a quiet internal voice saying this person is not what they are presenting. Just before we continue, my name is Jaina, and we just launched this channel for people passionate about psychology and human behavior just like you. The goal is to understand the hidden mechanisms behind people, emotions, and social interactions. If you want to help us keep going and improve the videos, think about subscribing. It's free and it makes a huge difference for us. Okay, let's continue. You were not broken. You were calibrated to a frequency most people cannot hear. 2. The gift arrived disguised as damage. Here is what no one told you when you were young. The same sensitivity that let you sense bad intentions made ordinary life almost unbearable. Crowded rooms felt like too much information arriving at once. Certain relationships exhausted you in ways you could not explain. You absorbed the emotional weather of every space you moved through, not by choice, but by nature. Jung observed that the most psychologically receptive individuals experience the world differently. They do not process reality at arm's length. They process it from the inside out. In the early years of life, seen from the outside, this can look like fragility to others. Withdrawal, overwhelm, a difficulty functioning in environments that other people navigate without effort. But Jung was precise about this. He said, the wound and the gift are not separate things. They are the same thing. The sensitivity that makes you vulnerable to too much sensation is the same one that allows you to perceive what others cannot. You cannot have one without the other. What looks like damage is actually a different kind of instrument, and like all instruments of precision, it requires a kind of handling that ordinary tools do not demand. 3. You learn to distrust yourself before you learn to trust yourself. This is the part that left the deepest mark because the signal was real. The perception was accurate, But for most of your early life, the world around you told you exactly the opposite. Trust me, you are imagining things. You always do this. Why can you not just relax? And so you built something that served as a survival mechanism, a layer of self-doubt deposited directly on top of your clearest perceptions, a habit of second-guessing yourself at the very moment the certainty arrived. Jung warned that when a person is systematically led to believe that their inner experience does not reflect reality, something fractures in the relationship between the self and its own signals. You stop trusting your own mind, not because your mind was wrong, but because the cost of insisting it was right became too high. So you overrode it. You went back. You gave the benefit of the doubt to people who had already shown you, beneath the surface, exactly who they were. And you paid for that more than once. Stop here. Because before we continue, something needs to be said directly. If you have spent years feeling like your perception is a burden rather than a capacity, I want you to consider something. Every time you were right about someone and talked yourself out of it anyway, that was not a failure of intuition. That was the result of being systematically conditioned to distrust the most accurate instrument you possess. The problem was never the signal. The problem was the way others reacted when you chose to trust it. Stay with me. For loneliness is the price of seeing clearly. There is a particular kind of isolation that belongs to this type of person. It is not the loneliness of having no one around. It is the loneliness of being surrounded by people and still being the only one who felt what just happened. You sat in rooms where everyone laughed and something cold moved through you. You watched a dynamic unfold that no one else seemed to register. You tried sometimes to say something, and the social cost of that was immediate and certain, so you learned to carry it alone. Jung saw in this phenomenon one of the most corrosive effects of heightened perception, not the perception itself, but the enforced silence around it. When what you see cannot be spoken, it does not disappear. It accumulates. It turns inward. It begins, over time, to feel less like a signal and more like a sentence. Many people with this capacity reach a breaking point in their late 20s or early 30s. The accumulated weight of things seen that could not be shared and of certainties that should have been trusted but were betrayed becomes unbearable. And here the path divides. They learn to stop at the surface like everyone else. They give up clarity to find peace, and they gain the peace. But they also lose something they cannot quite name and spend the rest of their lives with the strange sensation of having gone slightly deaf to something essential without ever being able to explain it to anyone. Those who do not surrender go through something different, harder, slower, and ultimately irreversible. 5. What happens when you finally stop apologizing for what you sense? It does not arrive as a revelation. It arrives quietly in the mid-30s for most as a kind of settling, a moment where you stop reaching for the self-doubt that used to come automatically. Someone enters the room and the signal rises, and this time, instead of talking yourself out of it, you simply note it calmly, without drama, without needing to announce it, defend it, or justify it to anyone, including yourself. You no longer fight your perception. You learn to listen to it and work with it. And this changes everything. Your decisions become quieter but more precise. You stop entering rooms that cost you something before they have even begun. You stop extending trust to meet other people's expectations and start giving it because it has been earned. Your relationships become fewer and significantly more real. Jung believed that the person who learns to listen to their own unconscious signals can no longer be easily manipulated by the hidden intentions of others. Not because the bad intentions disappear, but because they are no longer a surprise. They are simply information, received calmly, processed clearly. This is not bitterness. It is not cynicism. It is something much quieter than both. It is the earned clarity of someone who paid a long, expensive education in human nature and finally stopped leaving that knowledge on the table. The weight people feel in the room when you enter is not intimidation. It is the particular stillness of someone who cannot be easily deceived and has stopped pretending otherwise. Your words land differently because they carry no performance. Your silences communicate because they are not empty. The simple fact of your presence shifts something in others without ever demanding anything, simply by being the kind of person who notices what most people hope will go unnoticed. Jung believed this capacity, fully developed and no longer turned against itself, is one of the rarest forms of human intelligence, not the kind that scores well on tests, the kind that reads a room in 3 seconds and knows before anything is said where the danger is and where the truth is hiding. The world does not make it easy to be this kind of person. It calls you paranoid when you are accurate, sensitive when you are precise, difficult when you are simply unwilling to pretend you do not see what you see. But the world also quietly and without acknowledgement relies on people like you to see what it cannot afford to look at directly. You were never too much. You perceive something that most people do not have access to. And every year spent doubting that was not wasted. It was the slow, painful process of learning to carry something real without letting it destroy you. You are not paranoid. You are not broken. You are not too sensitive for this world. You are simply one of the few people in any given room who knows what is actually happening in it. Which part of this have you been carrying without the words for it? Leave it in the comments, because somewhere, someone else is reading this who felt exactly what you felt and spent just as long believing they were the problem. Your words are what remind them they never were.